Welcome to History Unveiled. Today we're diving into one of the most enigmatic legends of the American Southeast, the story of the Moon-Eyed people. Were these mysterious beings merely a myth? Or do the scattered accounts of pale, night-dwelling, white people expelled by the Cherokee hint at a hidden chapter of North American history? In this video, we'll explore the origins of the Moon-Eyed moniker as recorded in early Cherokee accounts and settler narratives, review historical sources and newspaper articles that mention these legends, examine modern interpretations and archaeological evidence, and invite you to consider the interplay between myth and history. Let's start at the very beginning. According to several early accounts, when the Cherokee first encountered the lands of the southern Appalachians, they found evidence, both in ruins and in oral tradition, of a people who had already inhabited the region. One of the earliest recorded descriptions comes from the American botanist Benjamin Smith Barton. In his 1797 work, New Views of the Origin of the Tribes and Nations of America, Barton relays a conversation with Colonel Leonard Marbury. Marbury explained that the Cherokee told him that when they first arrived in the region, they discovered it possessed by certain moon-eyed people who could not see in the daytime. These wretches they expelled. Barton's account is significant because it is the first to use the very descriptive term moon-eyed. But what did moon-eyed really mean? Some scholars suggest that the name refers to a sensitivity to daylight, a condition perhaps similar to poor vision in the bright sun, making these people active only by moonlight. In some versions of the legend, this attribute is interpreted as a sign of albinism or an adaptation to life underground. Early settler accounts sometimes mixed physical appearance with behavioral traits. Later interpretations by both native informants and white chroniclers would add that these people were short in stature, had pale or white skin, and, according to some, possessed blue eyes and beards. It is important to note, however, that the original Cherokee oral tradition may have simply used the phrase, moon-eyed, as an observation of unusual nighttime vision rather than a complete description of a separate race. Moving on from the phrase itself, let's review the early written records that mention the moon-eyed people. As we've already seen, Benjamin Smith Barton's 1797 book is a primary source for the legend. His account, relayed from Colonel Leonard Marbury, sets the stage for what would become a persistent story in the region. But Barton wasn't the only one. In the early 1800s, Tennessee's first governor John Sevier also played a part in spreading the tale. According to a 1969 newspaper article from the Forsyth County News in Georgia, Sevier visited Fort Mountain in 1782. There, he encountered Cherokee chief Okonostota, then around 90 years old, who reportedly told him that his ancestors had said the fort in the region was built by white men from across the Great Water. Although Sevier's letter is a later embellishment of the original oral tradition, it links the idea of an earlier non-Cherokee presence with European characteristics. Other early historical works reinforced these accounts. For instance, both Ezekiel Sanford's History of the United States Before the Revolution, published in 1819, and B.R. Carroll's Historical Collections of South Carolina, 1836, cite historian James Adair's interpretation of Cherokee tradition regarding a moon-eyed people. In 1902, anthropologist James Mooney published Myths of the Cherokee, a seminal work that helped preserve many oral traditions. Mooney linked Barton's account to several similar stories circulating at the time. He reported that some Cherokee elders told of a people who lived north of the Hiwassee River before moving west and eventually being driven away by the Cherokee. One account even described these people as a very small people, perfectly white. A 1923 article in the Chattanooga News also repeated the Cherokee legend as recorded by Barton, emphasizing that he seems to consider them an albino race. This later interpretation would later fuel arguments that the moon-eyed people were not only nocturnal but also had distinct physical features, a detail that would merge with later European legends. Thus, early settler accounts and early historians established a framework for the legend. They presented a dual narrative, one in which the Cherokee themselves remembered a mysterious people who once occupied the land, and another in which early white settlers, perhaps with their own biases, interpreted this tradition through a European lens. As we move through the centuries, the legend of the Moon-Eyed People began to acquire additional layers. By the mid to late 19th century, various accounts started to mix the Cherokee tradition with European myths of pre-Columbian transatlantic voyages. One popular variant is the connection to Welsh folklore, specifically, the legend of Prince Madoc ab Owain Gwynedd. According to Welsh legend, Madoc sailed to America in 1170, centuries before Columbus. Some early sources and later popular writings even link the Moon-Eyed People to Madoc's followers. In one account, Chief Okonostota is said to have mentioned that these white men had crossed the Great Water near Mobile, Alabama, and built fortifications that later became the ruins seen on Fort Mountain. For example, a 2008 article in the Athens Banner Herald by Walter Putnam discusses a plaque at Fort Mountain that attributes the ancient stone wall not only to the Cherokee legend but also to a band of Moon-Eyed People led by a Welsh prince. According to this version, these early settlers, descendants of Madoc, built structures that strongly resembled European fortifications. Some even claimed that the layout of the wall on Fort Mountain mimics that of Welsh castles like Dolwyddelan. However, not everyone agrees with this Welsh connection. In a long opinion piece published in the Rome Tribune in 2008, writer Stacey McCain argues that the original Cherokee legend did not mention color at all. According to McCain, it was only later, after a Philadelphia author repackaged the story, that the idea of a white or albino race entered the narrative. In other words, some historians now believe that the association with whiteness and the subsequent linking to Prince Madoc might be the result of later embellishments by Euro-American writers rather than an authentic Cherokee tradition. Modern interpretations are divided. Some researchers and enthusiasts argue that the legend reflects a genuine memory of an earlier group of people, perhaps even a population with albinism or an adaptation to a nocturnal lifestyle. Others see it as a fascinating example of how oral traditions can be reinterpreted and co-opted over time, blending Native American history with European exploration myths. As we examine the evolution of this story, it is clear that the interplay between myth and history is complex. Early settler accounts, colored by their own cultural preconceptions, may have inadvertently reinterpreted Cherokee oral traditions through a European lens. The result is a layered narrative in which a single phrase, Moon-Eyed People, comes to embody multiple meanings. A description of poor daylight vision, a marker for a mysterious other that predates Cherokee settlement, and, later, a coded reference to pre-Columbian European explorers. No exploration of the Moon-Eyed People legend would be complete without looking at the archaeological evidence, or, more accurately, the lack thereof. One of the most striking physical markers associated with this legend is found at Fort Mountain State Park in Chatsworth, Georgia. At Fort Mountain, a historical marker describes local legends that claim the stone wall was built by the Moon-Eyed People. The plaque reads that during a certain phase of the moon, when these people supposedly could not see well in daylight, the Creek people annihilated them. Other versions mention that these people had fair skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes, and that they built fortifications on the mountain. Yet, archaeological excavations in the region have not yielded conclusive evidence of a distinct, white, population predating Cherokee settlement. For instance, excavations by the Anthropology Department at the University of Tennessee have dated some of these stone structures to periods that are consistent with known Native American mound-building traditions, particularly those of the Mississippian culture. The widely accepted view among professional archaeologists is that these ruins were constructed by indigenous peoples and are not evidence of a pre-Cherokee, white, European-like race. A 1989 article in the Los Angeles Times is frequently cited in discussions about this subject. In it, researchers noted that structures such as the so-called Old Stone Fort were built during the 3rd century by a culture that predated any possible European influence. No artifacts, no coins, no weaponry with European heraldry have ever been definitively linked to a Welsh or other European presence in the region. Furthermore, a talc and soapstone statue displayed at the Cherokee County Historical Museum in Murphy, North Carolina, is sometimes attributed to the Moon-Eyed people. The statue depicts two figures with unusual facial features that some have interpreted as representing the mysterious race. However, as with the stone walls, experts caution that such artifacts may simply be part of the broader spectrum of Native American art and myth rather than evidence of a distinct, pre-Cherokee people. Thus, the archaeological context leans heavily toward a Native American origin for these structures and artifacts. Although the legend of the Moon-Eyed people remains a captivating story, there is little physical evidence to support the existence of a pre-Cherokee race of white people. Instead, most scholars believe that later interpretations and embellishments, especially those influenced by European ideas such as the Madoc legend, have obscured the original meaning of the Cherokee tradition. So, where does that leave us? The legend of the Moon-Eyed people is a striking example of how myth and history can intertwine over centuries. On the one hand, we have early Cherokee oral traditions, preserved in accounts like those of Barton and Sevier, that speak of a mysterious people who once occupied the land. On the other, later European and American writers, whether seeking to assert a pre-Columbian European presence or simply embellishing local lore, have transformed that original narrative into something quite different. Modern researchers continue to debate the meaning of the term moon-eyed. Some scholars suggest that the descriptor simply refers to a group that was active at night, perhaps due to environmental adaptations or even a genetic condition that made daylight difficult to bear. Others argue that the later emphasis on physical traits such as pale skin and blue eyes is the product of cultural projection, an attempt by early settlers to explain mysterious ruins by attributing them to a lost European race. For example, some local legends, as reported in articles from outlets such as Blue Ridge Motorcycling Magazine and Atlas Obscura, emphasize that the Moon-Eyed people were short, blue-eyed, and pale, and that their appearance led to the suggestion that they might have been descendants of pre-Columbian Welsh explorers. In a 2023 article by Michael E. Gouge, the author recounts his personal journey through the Appalachian foothills in search of traces of these mysterious beings. Gouge notes that local lore not only describes the people's unusual physical features but also recounts daring nighttime raids and mysterious disappearances, details that have captured the imagination of many. Yet many academic archaeologists and historians remain skeptical. The prevailing view is that while the Cherokee legend is real, and indeed, the memory of encounters with a pre-existing population may have some basis in fact, the specific details, such as a connection to a Welsh prince like Madoc, are later additions. In fact, a 2008 opinion piece by Stacey McCain in the Rome Tribune argues that the Cherokee legend originally made no mention of skin color or European ancestry. These characteristics were attached to the legend only after a Philadelphia author repackaged the story. This blending of oral tradition with later historical revisionism illustrates a broader phenomenon. Throughout history, as cultures come into contact with one another, myths and legends are often reinterpreted to suit new narratives. In the case of the Moon-Eyed people, the merging of Cherokee tradition with European folklore may have served multiple purposes. It provided early settlers with a ready-made explanation for the stone ruins that dotted the landscape, and it offered a convenient pretext for claiming that North America had been discovered by Europeans long before Columbus. Today, the legend continues to inspire debate. Books, podcasts, and even YouTube videos explore various angles of the story, from the possibility that the legend reflects a real historical migration to the idea that it is simply a symbolic narrative about the displacement of one people by another. Cryptozoology enthusiasts sometimes even claim that the Moon-eyed people were a distinct subspecies of humans who left behind enigmatic clues in the form of mysterious structures and statues. Yet when we weigh these modern interpretations against the available archaeological evidence, the scales tip heavily in favor of a more mundane explanation: that the ruins and artifacts attributed to the Moon-eyed people were built by indigenous peoples whose traditions were later reinterpreted by outsiders. The insane connection to figures like Prince Madoc, while fascinating as a cultural phenomenon, remains unsubstantiated by any physical evidence. For instance, despite claims of European-style fortifications, rigorous archaeological studies have found no artifacts, such as coins, weapons, or heraldic insignia, that would support a pre-Columbian European presence in the Appalachian region. This interplay between myth and history is not unique to the Moon-eyed people. It is a reminder of how human memory and storytelling can reshape events over time. Oral traditions, by their very nature, evolve. When these stories are eventually written down, they may be filtered through the cultural and political lenses of those doing the recording. In the case of the Moon-eyed people, what began as a Cherokee tradition of remembering a mysterious pre-Cherokee presence was later augmented by settler narratives that sought to claim evidence of an ancient European incursion. As modern scholars, local historians, and even enthusiasts continue to debate the origins of the legend, one thing remains clear: the Moon-eyed people occupy a liminal space between myth and history. Their story is as much about the people who first inhabited these lands as it is about the way later generations have tried to interpret, and sometimes appropriate, that memory. So, what can we learn from the legend of the Moon-eyed people? First, it reminds us that history is not always a straightforward recitation of facts. It is a tapestry woven from memories, interpretations, and sometimes even misinterpretations. The Cherokee tradition, passed down through generations, captures a real sense of the ancient past, a time when one people encountered another. But once settlers began to record these traditions, their own cultural biases and preconceptions inevitably altered the narrative. For example, early accounts like Barton's may have originally focused on the unusual visual habits of the group, hence, moon-eyed. Over time, however, details such as physical appearance and even connections to European explorers were added. These later embellishments may have been intended to explain the existence of enigmatic ruins or to lend legitimacy to colonial claims by asserting that a white race had once occupied these lands. The story of Prince Madoc is a case in point. Madoc's legend, of a Welsh prince who sailed to America in the 12th century, was a popular narrative among some early American historians and was even invoked by figures like Thomas Jefferson. Whether or not there is any truth to Madoc's voyage, the mere association with the Moon-eyed people has sparked imaginations for generations. This merging of myth and history poses an important question. How do we separate fact from folklore? Modern archaeology has largely debunked the idea that a pre-Columbian white race built the stone fortifications in the Appalachians. Yet the persistence of the legend tells us something valuable about human culture. It reflects our desire to explain the unknown and to create narratives that make sense of our surroundings. Now, we'd like to hear from you. What do you think of the Moon-eyed people legend? Do you believe that there might be a kernel of truth hidden within these oral traditions? Or is it simply an example of myth-making and later embellishment? Could the moon-eyed descriptor be a misunderstood observation of natural phenomena? Perhaps even a reference to a population with genetic traits affecting vision? Or is it a label imposed by early settlers to explain mysterious ruins? As you consider these questions, remember that history is not just about what we can prove with artifacts or documents. It's also about understanding the cultural and psychological forces that shape our interpretations of the past. Oral traditions, like the one of the Moon-Eyed people, remind us that human history is as much a story we tell ourselves as it is a record of events. In the end, the legend of the Moon-Eyed people serves as a fascinating case study. It is a window into the minds of early Native Americans, the settlers who recorded their stories, and the modern scholars who continue to debate their meaning. Whether you see it as a genuine memory of an ancient people or as a myth that evolved through the interplay of diverse cultural narratives, there is no doubt that this legend continues to captivate our imagination. To sum up, we've explored how the term, moon-eyed, first emerged in the late 18th century through accounts like Benjamin Smith Barton's 1797 book, and later through the recollections of leaders such as Chief Okonostota as reported by Governor John Sevier. We looked at how early settler narratives and subsequent historians, like James Mooney, helped shape a multifaceted legend that blends Cherokee oral tradition with later European myth, including the famous tale of Prince Madoc. We also examined the archaeological context of sites like Fort Mountain State Park and how modern excavations have largely discredited the idea of a pre-Cherokee white race while still leaving room for a rich, symbolic tradition. Ultimately, the story of the Moon-Eyed people challenges us to consider how myth and history interact, and it underscores the complex process by which oral traditions are recorded, interpreted, and sometimes transformed over time. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of Appalachia's most mysterious legends. We hope that by looking at the evidence, from ancient texts and newspaper accounts to modern archaeological studies, you've gained a deeper understanding of how legends like that of the Moon-Eyed people can both illuminate and obscure our past. Now, we invite you to share your thoughts. Do you think there is a hidden historical truth behind the legend? Could the Moon-Eyed people be a misunderstood memory of a population with unusual adaptations, or are they simply a myth that has grown in the telling? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the mysteries of the past, please give this video a like, subscribe to History Unveiled, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any future explorations into history's hidden chapters.